Yo, yo, yo. Hello. Welcome back to my world. Do you want to learn how to make $1 million? Do I have the life hack for you in these 3 easy steps? First of all, you have to wake up at 1:30 a.m. in the morning, okay? All those people who wake up at 6 a.m. or even 4 a.m., they're losers. They're not disciplined enough. 1:30 a.m. is what time you wake up if you really want to be successful, okay? That's step one. Step two, I have a trademarked, copyrighted, patented supplement for you. All right. All those other supplements, that's snake oil, people. My supplement, it's made with, well, I can't even tell you. That's step two. All right. And step three is a absolutely unique workout that I invented through years and years of testing. All right. And personal experience. This one exercise maneuver, it is all you need. It works every single muscle in the body and the brain. Okay. This is a whole new paradigm of exercise technique. It works the brain as well as the body all at the same time. I invented that. Again, over years of testing. I have a PhD. Did I mention that? Through these 3 easy techniques, you will easily be making $1 million. Probably in 3 days. In most cases, like 90% of you will be making $1 million in 3 days. The other 10% of you, it might take you a week. Okay. I'll tell you all about the details of this unique package at the end of the live stream at the top of the hour at 10 o'clock when I'm done. Until then, just make yourself comfortable. Let me have some questions to chew on. I'm here for you. Maybe you want to tell me about your life. Maybe you want to vent a little bit about that annoying coworker today. And I can give you my input on any number of situations that you might be dealing with in your life. That is what I'm here for, among other things. Until I start receiving some questions from you people, I will like to reflect on a bit of a news item I just came across. There's a lecturer at the University of Cardiff. I don't know how many of you saw this article that's being passed around, at least in academic circles in the UK. A lecturer at the University of Cardiff just killed himself. And literally, he mentioned in his suicide notes, I believe, if I read the article correctly, he literally mentioned overwork in academia as one of the reasons. I shouldn't be laughing. No disrespect at all. Obviously, serious tragedy. But he literally explicitly cited the academic work environment as one of the reasons why he killed himself. And his wife is now in the media basically blaming the University of Cardiff for overworking this man to death. And I'm just like, damn, good thing I got out. Because honestly, that would be me probably if I didn't get out 10 years. This guy was only 48. And if I stayed in, I'm 32. If I stayed in, 10 plus years, about 15 more years, I would probably be on the brink of suicide myself. I've told you on here before, maybe not all of you got this or were there when I said this, but I've only ever had one serious spell of depression in my life. And it was about 2 years ago. And I chalk it up directly to overwork from academia. Now, obviously, I can't put all the blame on academia because, if you're overworking to that degree, you do also have there's something wrong with you, with your outlook, with your attitude, and with how you value and prioritize things. I mean, there definitely was with me. I was just obsessed with succeeding in academia. This was like before I really established myself and like proved myself. That was before I had like prestigious publications, and I was really just eager and anxious to, prove myself to my peers. And so I worked like a dog, and I didn't really have to work that hard, but I also couldn't really escape that mentality either. And yeah, that drove me into the ground. And um it was after that I really started to think like, okay, I can't allow my life to be organized around this like competitive drive for status completely. Or, you can still be ambitious and you can still work really hard and still have a kind of a drive for a certain type of success that's equally aggressive and significant. But the real problem is when it's wrapped around a very narrow and kind of like socially conditioned kind of status climbing. Because then you have a real problem. Because, well, yeah, without going too much into it, the healthy way of thinking about one's own aspirations and ambitions would be a way in which you have a kind of direct and open relationship with your values and what it is like you're striving after. You don't need anyone to approve of it, and you don't need like external markers of validation. Then you can set yourself up for a healthy and productive kind of ambitiousness. But when your aspirations and your ambitions are looped through or mediated by things like promotion and making other particular people happy, and trying to surpass other people in their accomplishments, or anything like that, you're setting yourself up for a life of just disastrous mental health, I think. And yeah, so academia definitely does cultivate that. I'm very sorry to hear about this man's suicide, and I will pray for him. But yeah, folks, academia, there's some sick and twisted shit going on in there. So good riddance. Aria in the chat, what's up? Usually don't see my wife in the chat. She usually does not care about my internet shenanigans. That's not true. She does check in. She monitors my creative output. I think she's probably trying to make sure I don't go too crazy. The day after I make a video, sometimes I'll hear from Aria that she disagrees. But for the most part, she doesn't monitor me too closely. But she's in the chat tonight. What's up, Aria? She's also downstairs where I am right now. So this is very funny. It's very funny how my live stream has become quite a family affair. My mother-in-law is regularly in the chat now. And in fact, she'll probably appear at some point. And my own parents now watch my live stream. It's very, very funny. It's very strange. It's funny how this has become like a very wholesome kind of family bonding type of venue. Because, when I first left the United States and embarked on this kind of international intellectual trajectory, or whatever you want to call it, I was very much sort of on a vector away from my family, on a vector away from provincial, towny types of relationships. But then, folks, I got to be honest with you. I traveled into the belly of the beast of cosmopolitan sophistication. I was there, man. I was with the greats. I was in rooms filled with famous, highly influential, prestigious intellectuals. And it was fun for a little bit. But again, I realized that I was just kind of, how should I put it? It's not all it's cracked up to be. It's kind of one of those things, folks, when you kind of climb to a certain level in the international, like, prestige hierarchy, it's kind of like the Wizard of Oz. Once you peek behind the curtain, you're kind of horrified at what you find there for the most part. And now I'm in this kind of organic transition where just following the thread of my own passions and intellectual pursuits, all of a sudden now I'm being popped out of that, and I've pierced through to the other side, and on the other side is my family, my the Murphy family, and also my wife's family. I'm now talking into the public and in a way that my family now all of a sudden has taken an interest in. It's very, very strange. In a way, it's like I'm so extremely online, and I'm so sort of like the internet is kind of like extreme internationalism. Like it's even more international than just being an academic in Europe or whatever, like I am or like I was. Um, Going purely on the internet, I'm kind of going even more cosmopolitan in some sense, even more international in some sense, and yet I'm also kind of returning home in some sense. It's also a place that for some reason, unbeknownst to me, multiple members of my family are now joining me in the you know, digital international stratosphere. It's very strange. It's very strange. But hey, I don't care. Anyone who wants to listen to my shit can listen to my shit. Excuse my French. Because now that this is very family friendly fare, I have to really watch my mouth. I would love for kids to also join. Uh it's just strange. It's very, very wild. Anyway, what should we talk about? Again, if you have some questions, hey, I see Finargle, don't you dare talk to my wife like that. She's not a single babe, okay? She is not single. That's what it means to be a wife, okay? None of you hit on my wife in here, or I will ban her from my live stream chat rooms. I'm just kidding. I'm not that like patriarchal. All right. Ezra says, I was going to go into academia, but after seeing what you've gone through, I've decided to make my own way and just be done after I get my associates. Wow. I should say, I'm not actually telling anyone that they shouldn't pursue academia. I think it would be good for some types of people, in particular, what I would say is that if you are a young person and you don't know what you're doing, but you want to read and, kind of discipline your intuitions and make your work ethic better, doing a PhD in the United States that's fully paid is still a very worthwhile thing. It was one of the best experiences I had, I think. Really, really worthwhile to do if you have nothing else to do and you're not sure what else you want to do, as long as it's fully paid. Spending 5 or 6 years just reading and doing intense coursework and getting that PhD with a small stipend, which is usually what you get. 200, maybe $1,500, $2,000 a month or something like that, and all the tuition paid if you can get that. And that's generally what you get if you do get into a PhD program in the United States. Even if that doesn't lead to a job, and in many cases it doesn't lead to a job, and even if academia sucks after that, and academia does suck after that, even still, that experience of doing a PhD, if it is fully paid, is, I would highly recommend it if you're the type of person who wants that type of experience. That's quite good. So that, for instance, that's still available, and people should consider that. And look, also, I mean, I think for a certain type of person, academia is still not a bad job to get if you can get it. The problem is getting it. I mean, there just aren't that many jobs. And the other thing is, it is getting worse over time. I'm utterly convinced of this. Like, you look at this guy in the UK who killed himself because of overwork in academia. Well, think about it. At most universities, they are actively cutting jobs. They're trying to cut costs. And this is across the UK. The situation in the US is different, and I'm less familiar with it. But there, I mean, it's well known that, at best, hiring is kind of slowing down, or it's pausing. I'm not sure if they're cutting positions quite, but they're definitely, many places have hiring freezes, and they're certainly not expanding at half the rate that PhDs are being produced. So across academia, one way or another, the jobs are not increasing, or in some cases they're decreasing, but students continue to increase, right? So it's easy to see. It's a pretty simple math equation, folks, that even if you do get into academia, if you break in and get an academic job, it's probably going to be shittier and shittier over time. I mean, I just don't see any way around that, because there's more and more work to be done per person that's an academic. And I think it's pretty clear, like, that academic administrators are basically taking advantage of this. It's the way that it looks like. That's just the way that it looks to me. Think about it. Academia remains, with a lot of prestige, and a lot of people want to get into academia. People still on the outside People think it looks good. We have a certain kind of mythological image of what academia is like, really cushy, really, really nice job. And in some ways that's true. But in other ways, it's just not true anymore at all. But because people have that kind of mythical image of it, so many people are still trying to break into academia. And because there are so many people trying to break in, it means you can milk the workers that are in the system even more, because there's this kind of mimetic investment. There's this kind of intense mimetic competition organized around a kind of mythological herd-like imagination of what academia is, even for the people in it. Like, even people in academia who are overworked, who don't enjoy half of the features of a life that they thought they would enjoy when they set out to pursue academia. Even people in academia who see how things actually really work and are confronting the fact that it's not really what they dreamed of, and in a lot of ways it's got a lot of shit they never dreamed of. Even those people who see it from the inside, they still often share a kind of imaginary aspiration, or a kind of, they have rose tinted glasses towards the reality, and they imagine that maybe not this year, but when they get that promotion next year or somewhere down the line, academia really is going to be that like cushy, desirable state of life that they dreamed it would be. So yeah, there's some deep and systematic kind of mimetic illusion, I think, that is going on around academia. But what it means at the end of the day is that because there's this kind of shared investment in it, even if it's not really realistic, even if it's not the true reality of what life is like in it, it basically means you can extract more and more labor from academics. And the way that it looks is like every year, at least in my experience, every year they try to basically like offload new forms of labor to academics. And in your own mind as an academic, you think like, okay, I can handle this. First of all, this is my obligation to the students. So it has a kind of like ethical, moral motivation to it. Like, you're doing it for the kids, basically. And if you don't want to do the new forms of labor they're pushing onto you, you feel guilty, like you're disrespecting the kids, or like you don't care about the kids or something like that. And so that's one part of how this kind of twisted psychology works. But another is you're thinking, oh man, this is a really good job. I better do this new form of labor they're adding to my workload, because if I don't, then, maybe I'll lose this job, or maybe I'll fall behind and then I'll get pushed out, or, whatever. You have these kinds of fears of losing this job, even though meanwhile you don't even like it. And meanwhile, at the pub after work, it's mostly academics mostly complain about, everything they dislike about the job. And so it's very, very twisted. But what it means is they can push more and more work onto you. And academics have all of these like twisted psychological repetition compulsions, where they justify and motivate themselves to take on more and more work, because they think they really like the system and they think it's really great and they're trying to stay in it. And there's these ethical kind of moral obligations or motivations attached to it. Very, very dark and twisted. And so what you're going to see, I think, more and more is the administrators know this. So they take on more and more students. They're getting more and more money from that, obviously. And then they stop hiring academics, and they use these psychological hangups that academics have to basically every year extract a little bit more labor from the few academics that are, currently employed. And yeah, it's causing people to go crazy. Some people are going to kill themselves, as you're seeing. Some people are going to pull the plug and start talking shit and get fired, like me. Well, I wasn't fired. I resigned. But you get the idea. And, and then there's a third possible way to go about it, which is you become an administrator yourself. And that's why you're seeing, I think, a significant growth in administrative roles, because, it's increasingly difficult to just be left alone and do your research because of these problems. And so one way that you can kind of get in front of it is to get one of those higher level administrative jobs and be the person who distributes and manages the workloads onto other people. It's still, you're still suffering from it to some degree, but one, you're getting paid way more. Of course, you're completely forfeiting any claim to be like a true intellectual, but that's fine. You're getting paid a little bit more, and you're kind of getting out from underneath the boot of the intense like managerial exploitation increasing. And yeah, that's one way to do it, and a lot of people do that. But then you're signing on to a life of resentment and dissatisfaction. So yeah, it's all gonna go kaboom sooner than later. I assure you. I don't think it's gonna be a very highly visible or obvious kaboom. It's gonna probably be a slow kaboom. Not a bang but a whimper. And I think that's probably what you're seeing already. There just probably will never come a moment where it's suddenly collapsed. It's just going to become, the job is going to become worse and worse. True intellectual energy is going to evacuate the university more and more. And just all of the kind of relevant, significant intellectual developments are going to be taking place outside of academia, which again is probably already happening. The problem is that people still remain so fixated on it, and they imagine that it's this great job, and they imagine that it matters and all of this kind of stuff. So as someone who was pretty deep into the belly of the beast and just recently became a truly free agent, I can assure you things are not as they look. So, all right, we got some action in the chat here. Punks Minoaka, my buddy. I don't want to dox people, so I was about to say his name, but I won't. What's up, buddy? I see you out there. Thanks for hanging out as always. And Punks Minoaka says that I should grow my beard back. I'm a free agent now. I don't have to satisfy any professional obligations or expectations about my appearance. I could grow my damn beard out if I want to, all the way down to here. Actually, when I first got this job in the UK, I actually did have a big beard, and this was me as a young lad trying to maintain my kind of like radical vigor, my refusal to fit into the box set by the man. I had a big ass beard like down here. But then, ultimately I got tired of looking like a crazy man and got rid of it. So I could do it. I could bring it back. I'm going to start wearing my fishing vest that I have. That's going to be, which I got from my brother-in-law. Shout out to my brother-in-law. I don't think he watches this yet because he's off doing productive things. But he gave me a fishing vest, and I really like it. And I'm going to honor my brother-in-law by making that fishing vest a substantial part of my post-academic uniform, I think. And yeah, so maybe grow out my beard a bit. I'm not quite ready to do the like wearing like hippie sandals thing yet. I still like my black Vans is still my go-to look. Maybe in a few years I might switch to those like hideous kind of open toe sandals and wearing like fleece, like a fleece jacket every day, and getting like the eyeglass. What are they called? Like the cable eyeglass thing that goes around my neck, so I can let my glasses hang right here. What else? Maybe some like generic like hiking pants. Oh yeah. So probably do some stuff like that, but not for the next few years at least. For now, I'm still staying fairly fashionable as a fairly, svelte, decently good-looking young chap, not quite into my middle ages. I'm gonna enjoy my the last few years of my vaguely hipster young adulthood. All right, Spice Demiurge we got here for $5 super chat. Thank you very much, Spice Demiurge. Not all of my audience is a bunch of cheapskates. Spice Demiurge says, what's your favorite anime and why do trans girls like Nick Land so much? These are excellent questions. I'm afraid to say that I have no favorite anime. I've never been able to get into it. A few people in my audience, or, let's say a few people in the Murphyverse have tried to turn me on to anime, and I've kind of looked at stuff, but you see, you have to understand the problem is I'm not charging anime with anything. I'm sure anime is beautiful, wonderful subculture. The thing is that my heart is cold. I'm a little dead on the inside. There's something broken with me. I do not know what it is. I think academia did it to me, to be absolutely honest, not even being playful here. Sometime in the past 10 years, at some point, I just stopped reading anything that was not nonfiction. I haven't finished a novel in years. I can't remember the last time I finished a novel. I've tried, and something's broken. Something's broken. I'm going to cure this. I'm going to fix this broken part of myself. And then maybe I will be able to access the beauty and the value of anime that up until this point I've never been able to access. The cynical part of me wants to say I don't like cartoons because I'm an adult and I generally think adults should probably not be watching cartoons. But I'm willing to say that there's something there that I just don't understand. I'm willing to take the blame on that one. And I will keep you posted. As for the second part of the question, why do trans girls like Nick Land so much? Well, first of all, I cannot pretend to speak for trans girls. I do not know what it feels like to be a trans girl. I don't know if there is a particular reason why trans girls might be interested in Nick Land. So with that as just a caveat, the first answer I got to give straight up is it's impossible for me to know. It's impossible for me to speak on their behalf. And this is no virtue signaling. I think that's a genuine part of my answer and necessarily one of the first parts of my answer. Having said that, we could reflect a little bit on some sociological factors and try to make some hypotheses about what might be the relationship there. I could do that. How should I put this? Let's circle back to this. I'm not going to leave you hanging, Spice Demiurge, but let's take a few more questions from the audience, or a few comments. Let's say Punks Minoica says, "I almost quit reading during my PhD studies due to disgust to what I perceived as an obligatory process." Yeah, there is something about when you really kind of sign your mind and body over to this like all-consuming competitive process that really becomes a part of your life. It does kind of just make you not want to do other types of intellectual activities for fun in some sense. You're so kind of all of your energy and emotional motivation is fully exhausted in kind of the competitive professional track that not only do you have nothing left over for fun reading, but it's almost like you don't even want to try to give anything to the fun versions of what it is you kind of have to be doing competitively. It's very hard to describe, but yeah, there's something true there. Edwin Smith asks, Justin, can you write me a recommendation letter? I just got an email from a former student asking for a recommendation letter. And I said, of course, I'm always happy to write recommendation letters. I always do. But, I'm not a professor anymore, right? Is that going to be a problem? And she was like, no, it's fine. I don't care. I still want a recommendation letter. So I'm like, yeah, sure. So yeah, I can still write recommendation letters. Why not? I guess I can't use like university letterhead anymore though. Let's see what else we got here. Okay, I'll kind of circle back to the Spiced Demiurge's question. You see, when you drop that super chat, people, you get my full and undivided attention. I answered those questions with the maximum of my intellectual capacity. So I'm going to circle back to this. Yes, and I'll try not to get canceled with my answer. Oh, Haramite right there basically comes through with the answer that I was just about to give, which is basically that, there is in Nick Land's writings a strong interest in things like biological transformations and what in other communities you might call biohacking, or different ways in which human biology and synthetic machines are going to increasingly become kind of intercommunicative. And so yeah, I think there's a natural interest in Nick Land's ideas, probably, for trans people, because trans people are in some sense at the frontier of of biological transformation in some sense. And yeah, so I think it makes a lot of sense. Like if you listen to my conversation with Nick Sland, who since our conversation, Nick Sland has disowned me. Nick Sland now hates me for reasons I genuinely cannot fathom. I genuinely don't understand. I also, it's fine. It's all good. There are so many random crazy people on the internet that if all of a sudden one of them dislikes me or has some kind of campaign against me, uh, honestly, it's hard for me to even understand why or what's going on. So I'm certainly not going to be like very upset or offended or anything. But yes, Nick Land, who I did do a podcast with a while back, and who now hates me. Nonetheless, I will say that Nick Land has some interesting ideas that I think are a good representation of exactly what I'm saying. Nick Land has these ideas about how trans people are, basically representatives of, contemporary kind of like cutting edge accelerationist praxis in some sense, and you can easily see why. So yes, I've been nixed, as they say. All right, that's fine. That's good. Yeah, I think that's probably all there is to it. I mean, it's probably not necessarily true that trans girls generally like Nick Land. You would be better off saying that of the people who like Nick Land, there is a noticeable contingent of trans girls. But I'm sure if you did a survey of all of the trans girls in existence and you asked them what they think about Nick Land, an overwhelming majority of them would say either who is that or no, I don't like him. So I'm also kind of taking issue with the question. It's probably not true that there's any relationship between trans girls and the liking of Nick Land. But for those trans girls who do like Nick Land, it probably, it has something to do with the accelerationist emphasis on kind of biology machine interactions and how should I put this? I was just reading today or rereading today The Dark Enlightenment because it's a long and it's a fairly complicated essay. Nick Land obviously put a lot. He kind of laid a lot out there, and it's one of probably his more influential pieces. And I was thinking about how I actually never really. I don't think I ever read it in full. I read like most of it a while ago, but I didn't remember actually reading the whole thing. So I recently just read the whole thing. And there's a lot at the end about where he talks about race and how contemporary racial conflicts around like white versus black and this sort of stuff is all quite trivial. That these distinctions that people make nowadays between white and black, and the white nationalists versus like the black radicals or whatever, like that this is all kind of missing the point, and that really what's far more interesting and relevant is vectors of actual speciation that soon we're going to be looking at such significant divergences in kind of evolutionary pathways that this is where he has this famous line where he says think face tentacles, right? So Nick is much more interested in more deeply fundamental and radical kinds of evolutionary divergences. And I think the accelerationist the trans accelerationist contingent, let's say, I think for obvious personal reasons are very interested in and very familiar with the significance of substantial biological transformations that are available today, not only socially and culturally, but also technologically. So someone else, give me other questions. What do you think about the transvaluation of all values? Is Christianity a prison or the most we can aspire to? Also, are demons real? Wow. Rob Walker coming through with the super chat just to reaffirm face tentacles. I think the transvaluation of values is a very good idea, a very important idea, and one that remains worth keeping around, worth thinking about, and worth aspiring to. I think that Nietzsche's phrase of the transvaluation of values names a much longer running kind of philosophical and political project, and one that I'm quite partial to and sympathetic to. I see someone like Diogenes of Sinope to be kind of one iteration of that. I think Jesus was an iteration of that. I think a lot of the most admirable and significant philosophical and political projects towards human liberation, and yeah, well, let's just say human liberation, have essentially been something like projects to transvalue values. And so, yeah, you can have lots of debates about particular iterations of that. What exactly did Nietzsche mean by that? And should we agree with Nietzsche's vision in particular? But the general idea, I would say, is one that I think remains to have a lot of value and currency. And yeah, so generally, I'm in favor. Of course, the devil is in the details. How are you going to transvalue the values, and in what way? But the way that I think about it personally is that capitalism basically is the system that obviously, in some sense, it's a machine for producing values. The price system is a kind of cybernetic technology for the estimation of values, and in some sense, it does this tremendously well. In another sense, it doesn't do this so well. When you think about kind of the larger values that most humans hold, and that uh, capitalism is always generally conflicting with, right? So in particular domains, it seems like capitalism is, undeniably good at, for instance, determining like what is the value of this pen. Markets can give you the value of this pen more efficiently and effectively than any other technology we've ever had. So in that sense, that's undeniable. But then, the problem, as of course Marxists have always pointed out, and the Frankfurt School points out, is that the actual, when you look at it as a system as a whole, you see things like suicidal kind of environmental destruction and these types of systemic irrationalities, constant booms and busts, and all of that. And so from the outside as a whole, the system itself appears to be irrational, and it appears to be fundamentally nihilistic. There's no, it seems to be going somewhere, which we can summarize as, the increase of intelligence, or the economic growth, or whatever, however you want to conceptualize that. It seems to have this kind of overarching set of values that drive it, but when we look at that and evaluate it, we actually don't really value it that much. A lot of things that we do value the most, capitalism seems uniquely incapable of gauging, and it seems to be kind of off on its own vector towards destruction, which we don't value. Yeah, and then I think you also see this sort of problem in more mundane ways, like when you think of just about the normal kind of order of bourgeois society. Like, you think about the things that people care about and what they actually, you know, um, give attention to, and what they actually encourage and reward, and what they don't. And bourgeois society, as we know it in modernity, it's basically this kind of system of hypocrisies, right? It's what people say and what they do, is there's always a massive gap between that. People have these kinds of front stage and backstage versions of themselves, and this seems to be somewhat kind of constitutive of a capitalist society in some sense, or intrinsically, to some degree, what it means to kind of inhabit life in a capitalist system. And so in this other way, like what we value on a day-to-day basis doesn't actually reflect what we really value. And so, yeah, there are all these ways in which the reign of value in a kind of normal everyday sense of, that you see when you look out at a kind of modern capitalist society, shit is twisted. It's fucked up. Things are, there are all these weird errors and misdirections and problems in how society values things. And that the true goal of philosophy, which would also be the true goal of politics in some sense, understood correctly. If you understand both of these things correctly, it would be restoring or declaring in a kind of concretely effective way what is the true value of all things, and putting things in their place. In other words, like ideally we would have a proper ordering of what's valued, so that all of these things are kind of set right. And I think philosophy in some sense is always trying to do this. Diogenes, who a lot of you know is one of my patron saints personally, Diogenes of Sinope, talked about defacing the currency. This is a very major Cynic idea, an idea of the ancient Cynics. And that basically alludes to something quite like the transvaluation of values. If money is kind of the normal way of valuing things, there's something wrong there. And the currency at any point in time, in any status quo, needs to be defaced. What normal people see as valuable and all of its hypocrisies, it needs to be constantly overthrown. And I think that's the work of philosophy, and also of radical political action also. So that's just a bit of a rant on the transvaluation of values. I don't think I was really going anywhere other than that. Oh, right. Haramite said it already. Sorry, I beat me to the punch. Good work. They'll get more into land later when they realize they must secure a future for trans children. That's funny. What else do we got? Yes, I'm quoting Haramite. Good work, Haramite. All right, good question by 2FL. So if academia is doomed, what are alternatives to do intellectual work? Not sure if you talked about that somewhere else. The alternative is dead simple. Just get out there and fucking do it. It's really that simple. There's no magical formula to it. I mean, that's always been the case. It's always been the case. I think the real problem has been the broadcast era, because it is true that in the era of mass broadcast, if you didn't get access to like a television studio or something like that, your ability to have a socially significant intellectual life was quite low. And so through these few decades where, with the rise of radio and then TV, in this kind of mass broadcast era that most of us take our kind of imagination of the public sphere from, it really only made sense to be a quote unquote public intellectual if you had some viable path to getting on the radio or getting on TV or whatever. Nowadays, like, who wants to be on TV? That's not where the action is. No one cares. Look, I've done TV a few different times. I've been on like BBC, I've been on Al Jazeera, whatever. No one watches that shit. Of course, there are eyeballs looking at it, but those people are like not real people. They're kind of dead behind the eyes. They're like not real thinkers or actors. Like it makes no difference if you're getting into the living room of the few people who like still watch BBC News on TV at home. Most people who do that are just, well, one, they're old. Two, they're more or less kind of resigned to an institutionalized status quo. And so, like, yeah, in my experience, that all of that stuff is just, it's like not even worth doing, let alone making major sacrifices to have the right to do that. But back in the day, that was like the only way to ever, be able to communicate with the public in some sense. You see this even with like radical political movements. I've read a bunch of books on this. If you look at like how social movements and the norms changed from like the 50s to the 60s and 70s, it was really the rise of TV and this and the fact that if you wanted to get your message across to a large number of people, you had to kind of reshape what you wanted to say and how you said it. And you can watch this affecting like the history of protest movements. You can watch activists, like radical activists, think about like the New Left or whatever. You can kind of trace out in those movements, and books have been written on this, about how people became more and more aware that if they want to actually affect the public conversation, they had to say what they were saying and dress in a certain way and act in a certain way that would get them on TV. And you can kind of see how attitudes and behaviors in the protest movements change in response to this strategic reality. And for some amount of time, it was a real strategic reality. Getting on TV, if you were like a political theorist of some kind, getting on TV gave you an extraordinary advantage in kind of having an effect and being, making your ideas significant. And if you couldn't get on TV and you were just like, writing books in your home or something like that as an idiosyncratic, isolated, whatever, tinkerer or dilettante, there was like a good chance maybe that no one would ever see your notebooks or even hear there was a possibility that literally if you were like a thinker or a writer or something like that, there's a chance that maybe literally nobody would ever get to even see anything you ever wrote or said. Whereas if you get on TV, lots of, millions of people might really like be affected by it. That used to be the case for a substantial amount of time in the broadcast period. And that's just not here anymore at all. So basically, we've been kind of socialized into those norms. We've been socialized into that kind of mentality about what is like worthwhile intellectual work. But that entire background set of context is completely gone. And so, there's really no sophisticated answer to the question. If academia is doomed, the alternative is to just do all of the things that academia does, but do it yourself and build what you want to build immediately and put it on the internet, and then just find the people that are interested in it or would value it. Now, look, there's no getting around like basic kind of status competition, and there's always going to naturally emerge hierarchies of attention and these sorts of things, no doubt. Just because that's just a function of scarcity, right? So long as there's multiple people trying to do something, there's only so much time. There's going to be intrinsically some sorting there going on and some competition going there. But so I'm not saying that therefore everyone can be an academic now on the internet. No, not at all. There's, you still have to pay your dues in the sense of, well, one, you have to have valuable, interesting, and unique things to say, which not everyone has. And they don't just come off of trees. You have to kind of like build that up for a while. Two, you have to actually do the legwork of building your ideas and building, value, like knowledge or value or experience of some kind that you can therefore represent, your intellectual work as something real and proven and valuable. Obviously, you need to do all of that legwork, and then you also are still going to have to do the work of earning people's attention, earning the right to be listened to or whatever. So it's not like it's all of a sudden a cakewalk. Anyone who wants to be a public intellectual can be a public intellectual. That's not the case. A lot of the old challenges are still there. But what is different is that if you really want to do it and you have the basic requirements, just like the basic intelligence, the basic discipline, and you're willing to put in the time and energy to develop something worth really sharing and that is intellectually sophisticated and valuable, so long as you meet like the basic objective requirements, then you have a damn good shot at least doing the work, right? Like whether or not it's going to be like hugely influential or significant or whatever, obviously that's not guaranteed to anyone, and it never has been. But what is really the most important thing is not like how many people you affect with like your intellectual work. It's having the minimum number of people necessary to motivate your intellectual work. I wrote a blog post about this not too long ago. I think this is an underappreciated point that a lot of people don't understand, which is like, if you want to live an intellectual life, which just basically means, spending most of your time focusing on ideas and developing a kind of search for some sort of truth and working on that as kind of the main vocation of your life, you don't need to get your work out to very large numbers of people. That's not the goal. The goal is just to have the bare minimum that you need for it to feel psychologically worth doing. You need the basic minimum to motivate doing it. But that's actually a much lower number than people think, you know? And so I've talked about this in my own context. Like, I'm not famous at all. Like, yeah, my YouTube channel has what, 2,000 subscribers about? And even in the world of YouTube, that's peanuts. I've 10,000 followers on Twitter. Again, in the world of Twitter and like, more influential public intellectuals, it's peanuts. Like, I'm not even really micro famous. And but that's not what matters for constituting yourself as like a genuine intellectual, because actually a genuine intellectual really doesn't give a shit about that sort of metric. What is real and what is, a just ineluctable kind of practical necessity is having just enough people reliably listening to or reading what you put out that you wake up every morning feeling like you want to do it and feeling like it's worthwhile. That's the difficult thing. When you first start blogging or doing YouTube videos or whatever, the really difficult, potentially fatal challenge is when literally nobody is listening to you. Like when you fire up your live stream and there's literally 0 people. That gets really hard to do, 2 days in a row, 3 days in a row, 4 days in a row. A human being can only work so long knowing that there's literally 0 people listening or reading. That's the problem. Once you get just enough people where it's subjectively motivating, that's the key. That's the key threshold. That's the key metric. And then as long as you find it worthwhile to wake up every morning to do it, as long as you know there's just enough people listening and reading that you're like, this gives me the minimum amount of energy I need to do what I'm interested in doing personally, that's when you're off to the races. That's when truly independent intellectual work becomes possible. And then frankly, it's just a matter of what you're capable of. It's a matter of like what your objective capacities are, because as long as you can motivate waking up every day and putting like a bunch of hours into the intellectual work that you're most interested in, whether that be research or creative work or whatever, once you have the minimum number of people, which is a relatively small number, mind you, it's really not that many people. Once you have that reliably there each day, then you can just stop worrying about like, is this going to make me famous? Is this going to make a lot of money? And you can just focus on, okay, I have just enough people paying attention to me that this is worth doing every day. And then you just think, what is the greatest thing I can do? What is the best type of work I'm capable of that actually reflects my greatest vision that I want to pursue? And then you can just set about working slowly and steadily on doing the greatest work that you're capable of doing in whatever way that looks like to you. And I think that's what the true intellectual life involves. Like, it's never involved trying to, like if you think that you're only a real intellectual if you have audiences of, several thousands of people and, you're someone like, if your image of the public intellectual is like Steven Pinker or something like that, and you think that's the only way that it's worthwhile to live an intellectual life, then you are not an intellectual. You don't understand what the intellectual life involves. Getting like kind of Steven Pinker levels of fame or whatever, like that's just a accidental kind of byproduct. It's can be a fun, I'm sure, and nice like reward if you're so blessed to have that kind of public position or whatever. Like that can happen later, maybe. But the true intellectual really doesn't care if that ever happens, I think personally. And I think for a lot of people who want to be intellectuals, it's actually the aspiration to have that kind of Steven Pinker status that actually prevents them from ever getting any work done, because it's so unlikely that if that's what you think you're after, if that's what you think the true intellectual has, and that's your goal or that's your benchmark for what success is, well, that's so statistically unlikely for even the smartest people that therefore you're going to have a hard time motivating yourself to do any work at all, because you're going to be constantly thinking about how your chances of that kind of success are very, very low. That's why, again, I really kind of push this ethic of radical detachment from instrumental payoffs and a kind of insistent, committed focus on just like putting one foot in front of the other, one step at a time, working on whatever you think is truly most important and most interesting, and just getting after that. as aggressively and enthusiastically as possible, as imminently as possible, to use a kind of Deleuzian term. It's all about imminence. You want to think about everything you do in imminent terms. That doesn't rely on some sort of like instrumental payoff, doesn't require permission, doesn't require some other thing down the line. You want to always spin out a kind of consistent motivation and project from that which is immediately available to you and which no one can take away from you. That's how I think about it anyway. And I think that's what the true intellectual does. And everyone can do that. Like, not everyone can be Steven Pinker. Not everyone can have 1 million listeners or readers or whatever, but hundreds of people, if not thousands of people, well, indeed, thousands of people, more than thousands of people, who are smart, thoughtful, educated people who want to do serious, meaningful intellectual work that will be listened to or heard or read by other people and will affect the way that other people think, and it will make its impact to some degree. Thousands of people, there's more than enough room and space for thousands of people to do really dedicated long-term intellectual work in a really radical and incisive way, and to one day get their readers, one day get their listeners, even if that's a smaller number than someone like Steven Pinker gets. You don't need those sorts of numbers for an intellectual life to be very meaningful. Punks Manoica says it's all about engagement of the few that are going to contribute a lot, or the many who are willing to give a penny. I'm not sure if you're referring to kind of like money and the finances aspect in particular, or if you're talking about kind of contributions of energy and interest. What else we got? Haramite just became my 2,000th subscriber. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Haramite says that primetime CNN gets 1 million some viewers. Yeah, no doubt. There are lots of eyeballs on CNN. I would obviously not doubt that. One, they are mostly older people. So mostly people who have checked out of shaping culture. And two, I would argue that the people who watch CNN the most are those who are self-selecting into a kind of uncreative kind of deference to kind of like traditional presumptions, such that this is just my wager anyway. I could totally be wrong, but basically my sense is that the people who watch CNN the most are exactly the least relevant people that you want to be trying to talk to or influencing. People like the kids who watch YouTube, younger people who watch YouTube, people who like get all of their news and sense of reality from YouTube. Those are like the young people, the crazy people, the people who are going to be shooting off into all different types of creative vectors. Not necessarily like reforming society in this sense that a lot of people think about it. But those are going to be the people those are the movers and shakers. Like, I would much rather have an audience of 1,000 people on YouTube who are actually listening to what I really think, exactly as I want to think it, as creatively and honestly as I'm able to think it. I would much rather have 1,000 people on YouTube listening to that than have access to 1 million people on CNN who are those types of people who watch CNN and who need me to talk in the way that CNN news anchors talk. Like, that's what this basically comes down to. Like, think about it. What would you take? What would you choose? Think about it honestly. If you want to be heard by if you want to be seen and heard by the people who watch CNN, first thing is you have to talk like people who go on CNN. And second of all, you only get that type of person who watches CNN. I think it's a no-brainer. No ifs, ands, or buts. I'd much rather be able to say exactly what I want in the way that I'm able to say it to 1,000 people who are really listening on YouTube, who are young and weird and kind of like more independently minded and creatively minded. It's in terms of social impact. I genuinely think that speaking like your radical truth to 1,000 crazy people on YouTube is going to have much more social impact than if you could give me 1 million eyeballs on CNN. I fundamentally believe that. I mean, look, I wouldn't be here if I didn't believe that. And I think that's like one of the things that I now do have kind of on the table that a lot of other people don't have on the table, which is skin in the game. I now have skin in the game. I would not be doing what I'm doing right now if I didn't believe exactly what I'm saying. Because as I said, I was on TV. I was at that level. I was doing all that shit, and I could have easily kept doing all of that. All I would have needed to do is like not call people retards, which is quite within my capacities. I did not call anyone a retard for years until I decided to start letting my guard down. Yeah, and in part it is because, yeah, you look behind the curtain, you get on TV a couple times, you kind of see how that works, you see what's really going on there. You get a sense of how people respond to things differently in different media, and you just realize, like, man, the sacrifices you have to make to get onto like Al Jazeera or CNN, all of the kind of neutering of your intellectual capacities that you have to do to get to that level. It's just not worth it. It's not worth the highly limited and kind of castrated way of speaking that you have to adopt, and the ultimate kind of audience effect, given the type of audience that you're dealing with. All right. What else do we got? 2FL says, follow up. How do I not starve doing intellectual work? Yeah, well, again, there's no easy solution for that. And I'm definitely not about to start wheeling out some kind of self-help guide. But, I think the history of intellectuals gives a rich kind of data set on how to not starve doing intellectual work. The first thing is you probably have to decrease your expectations for like material comforts. I mean, that's always been the case. It's always been a requirement of true radical intellectuals. Brace yourself to have a relatively low standard of material comfort. One problem we have today is that people who want to be intellectuals also want to be super comfortable, financially secure, middle class, bourgeois people. And I'm sorry, but that's never really been a reliable option in life. You've never really been able to have both of those. And so, yeah, if you want both of those, you might have to significantly decrease your material aspirations. That's one thing. And maybe you even have to live a little bit leaner than you're willing to accept. But maybe you need to learn to accept that. That's one, no doubt. Two, the classic other way to do it is you do a fucking real job that makes value and makes actual money to some degree for some of the time, and then you do your intellectual work on the side. And I don't think that's any harder now than it used to be. Like Spinoza, for instance. Spinoza avoided the academy like the plague, and he was basically a lens crafter, like a lens grinder. I forget exactly, a lens worker. I forget exactly what you would call that or what he did, but he was basically an artisan, worked on lenses, like eyeglass lenses. And that's how he paid the bills. And then he wrote and did research in his off time. There are lots of other examples of that. And so, yeah, that's another classic way to do it. And, I don't think that's any harder now than it was at any time in the past. And in fact, I think it might even possibly be easier today. It's just we don't know how to do it yet. The reason I think it might be easier today is because tech jobs, if you can get teched up, then you can find ways to do old forms of labor, using automation and stuff like that. That would be one way to go. In some sense, I have a little bit of skin in this game. I have a little bit of experience with this also, because my wife and I do have a little business, which I don't really talk about at all on the internet because it has nothing to do with my kind of intellectual project, and I don't want to confuse people about like what I'm doing. But we have a little kind of like generic kind of digital agency where we do basically we help people with small businesses do things like Google Ads and Google Analytics and different types of advertising and marketing stuff. Like I'm really good with data and stuff like that. So we're able to offer help with a whole bunch of kind of digital services or whatever. It's nothing too sophisticated. But there are lots of small businesses and people don't know how to do a lot of that shit. So, you learn how to do sophisticated computer shit, and then you find a way to make yourself valuable to uh, the large number of people who still don't know how to do that shit, and yeah, use computers to do that stuff with relative efficiency, and that pays the bills, and then right on the internet the rest of your time. I don't know. It seems. I mean, I'm kind of doing it. I'm trying to. That's one plank of the kind of alternative like life that I'm trying to carve out. Um, of course, if you're lucky, then you might be able to build enough of an audience to do the totally crowdfunded thing. Uh, that is obviously, seems to be maybe the ideal outcome. And I'm sort of halfway there. Like I have a decent audience, many of whom are very generous, and thank you to all of you who do help out with me financially. So I'm getting enough money from you all that I'm it's maybe realistic in the next year or two, maybe sometime in the next year or two, I'll build up my like patronage enough that that could be the main source of income, and I could do the YouTube channel and my blog and write books full time. Like that would be the dream, obviously, I think, for public intellectuals today, and there are many people successfully doing that. So that's another possible answer to your question. That's obviously what I'm hoping to do and what I'm aspiring to do. That would be the ideal. But obviously, I'm realistic, and I wouldn't wager my whole family on successfully doing that. Although I would love it, and I'm definitely trying my best to get to that sort of outcome. But basically, I just have a bunch of irons in the fire. A little side business, some other like entrepreneurial efforts or whatever that I might turn to later if things don't work out. Or just go the route of working some other job. I don't know. I don't have a super sophisticated, like mapped out game plan. I'm kind of just experimenting as I go, and I'll figure it out. So I'm trying to figure these things out as much as you are. But yeah, look, I don't think it's rocket science. I think if you want to be a true, like radical public intellectual, then you do what true radical public intellectuals have always done, which is you prioritize saying what you want and doing the research you want, and you find the time each day to do that shit without asking permission, without apologizing for anything, and then you figure out a way to make money. That's really that simple. Like I think for the real for the real intellectual in history, I think there's a certain pattern that you see. One is that people, like the real intellectual, it's a kind of categorical necessity that almost comes on high. It's almost like it's not even in your control. You just know, you feel, and and you act accordingly. That you are going to work on your ideas, and you're going to write, and you're going to express yourself, and you're going to create things, and you're going to do that whether people like it or not. You're going to do it whether you can afford it or not, and you're just going to fucking do that no matter what, and money will figure itself out, and you'll figure that out as you go. I really do think that when you look at like the biographies of, like when I look at the biographies of the people I admire, you see this you see this pattern. It's a kind of condition, it's an unconditional necessity that you affirm and you do, and you kind of work out the rest as you go. And I think it's also a very Christian attitude that I do personally adopt, is that if you're doing that for the right reasons, if it really is for you about trying to figure out what the truth is and trying to express that as faithfully as possible, if that is really what your ultimate motivation is, then I really do think that things do have a way of working themselves out. I think that's empirical, and I think it's also that's also a somewhat religious perspective, but I think that it is essentially empirically consistent with the record. It's consistent with previous cases and the previous data points we have about how people do constitute themselves as intellectual forces in history. Woker Nexus dropping $10. Thank you, buddy. I appreciate that. I appreciate that very much. I'm very grateful to all of you out there who throw some money my way. Yeah, as I said, I'm definitely the portion of you out there who are patrons or throw me money each month in whatever way, that is definitely one of the most encouraging and kind of motivating things that that exist in my kind of weird ecosystem that is emerging around the work that I'm doing. So yeah, I'm always very grateful, and I mean that very sincerely, because you kind of help to justify how much work I'm putting into this sort of stuff instead of, the other ways that I might have to hedge my bets in the future, like finding a job or whatever. So let's see. Jean Michael Loon says, is this not what Moliere said when he said that true poetry art is that which is for bread, as in a necessity to exist? Yeah, I think that's right. And that's exactly the same intuition. Schopenhauer did the opposite, says Hermite, and bullied bread philosophers. Yeah, so there are interesting debates about this. I have this really good book called American Moderns. I think that's the name of the title. And it's basically about the history of bohemianism. And I love that book. It's a really good history. Because when you look at like the earliest bohemians, like these people were so much more radical than what most people today think of as bohemians. In every generation, there's almost always people who are willing to be like seriously fucking poor and live in really, truly shit conditions just for the freedom to not have to work that much and to create what they want to create and say what they want to say. Every generation has at least a few of those people. And so, yeah, no, not everyone can do that, but not everyone can be an intellectual, maybe, is the way that I would put it. And I'm not even saying I'm not saying I'm anything special at all. Like I don't especially want to be poor. I'm not like a hero or anything like that. I'm not saying that in the slightest. But what I will say is that leaving my job, insisting on like my basic right to say whatever I want and being willing to leave, a successful and highly coveted academic position for the simple right to say whatever I want and have more free time on the internet. Yeah, that definitely was a gesture that I had to think a lot about. I had to think a lot about how much do I value material comfort, because I have no idea what the future holds. I have no idea if any of the things I'm doing is going to turn into, sufficient quantities of money to live. I have no idea how that's going to work out. It's very uncertain. I'm confident in my abilities to figure it out. But the point is to make the choices I've had to make in my own path and lifestyle that I'm embarking on now. Yeah, you're damn right. I did have to decide, and I had to be honest and sincere about it, or else I wouldn't have done it. I had to decide that, the prospect of being poor worries me much less than the prospect of, spending the rest of my life with my intellectual and expressive capacities atrophied and operating at 50%. Like the fear that I would spend the rest of my life as an academic saying and doing only half of what I was capable of saying and doing, that fear or that prospect struck more fear in my heart than the fear that I leave academia and maybe I end up being a poor person. And I'm not that's my true valuation of it, and I wouldn't be doing this if that wasn't the case. So I'm not like boasting or anything. I'm just saying, yeah, you're damn right. Like if you want to pursue radical intellectual freedom, you better be prepared for the prospect of significant material hardship. I'm not glorifying it or making light of it. I'm also going to try my best to avoid it. But if that's what it comes to, I'm content with that. Haramite says, imagine the cleansing of academia if only people who would live on one meal a day would be allowed. Yeah. Imagine. That would be really funny. Bradshaw says, the U.S. is anti-intellectual, not just in the sense that we dislike intelligence. The country also makes it materially difficult to do intellectual labor. Yeah, maybe. I definitely take your point. But what is kind of good about the United States, though, is because it's relatively easy to do business, if you can kind of make of your intellectual life some sort of corresponding business entity, then arguably, there might be an advantage there. Look, and I think this is very difficult. I think this is riddled with problems and traps, no doubt. But basically, I mean, it does kind of seem to me like intellectuals are a little bit too afraid of money, maybe. And I was like this for the longest time. I kind of, and I still am to some degree. Look, like I still have deeply anti-capitalist intuitions. I think that money is kind of the root of most evils, and I think it's one of the greatest failure modes for intellectuals. Oh shit, it's 10:19 by the way. I promised myself I would cap these at 10 o'clock so that I don't ramble for too long. But all right, I'll finish a few more thoughts and then we'll wrap this up. I just wanted to give you a heads up. I do need to wrap this up because it is late here for me. But basically, what all I wanted to say on that point is that intellectuals, I think, are often averse to being very serious about money. But I think what nowadays, the way that cyberspace and kind of the digital economy is kind of becoming integrated into our lives, I think this is just it's increasingly kind of revealed how silly is the bifurcation between intellectual stuff and monetary stuff. Like, look, we're probably just getting to a place where every individual is going to be a business of their own base. I mean, that we're basically already there, right? Like that's what the gig economy is. Like everyone, whether we like it or not, every individual is basically going to be like a flexible kind of individual corporate entity entering into different types of contracts and both paying out and receiving payments in this kind of highly fluid, probably increasingly digitalized way. So I mean that's just a fact of life and of the nature of the economy today. But I think this is actually good news for intellectuals because there's always been in the imagination this kind of bifurcation between creative intellectual work and art and that sort of stuff and money. But now society and the economy is kind of just like making everything. It's making like payments and especially like kind of repeated micropayments. This is going to become more and more integrated into the fabric of everyday life. And so that's really good for people who do things like writing or creating or whatever. And that's what you're seeing, obviously, with things like Patreon. I think we're probably only at the beginning of this type of thing. And so, yeah, it's a game changer. It's a total game changer, I think, for thinking about the different ways in which you can have like entrepreneurial projects and also have pure disinterested radical truth-seeking projects. I think like we're only beginning to innovate with how you can do both of those things in ways that are financially successful, but that kind of like protect the integrity of both of those kind of competing priorities. In other words, what I'm getting at is I do think that there's a way to basically design and run a successful kind of business operation and also protect in its kind of radical integrity the true goal and criteria of the radical intellectual life, which is basically disinterested truth maximization. You can make enough money to live and maybe even live comfortably and to sustain your operation without necessarily maximizing or optimizing for money, which is like what most businesses do. I think the radical intellectual optimizes or maximizes for something like radical, like something just like radical is kind of implied by maximization, but just something like truth value output or something like that. It's a very fuzzy idea, but you catch my drift. It's something obviously orthogonal to profit. It's more of a function in which like you need a certain amount of profit to live, but then you're optimizing for something else, call it the truth or whatever. That is, I think, like what the ideal model looks like. We just have to figure out, one, how to make that work, and two, we also have to figure out how to kind of prevent the truth-seeking model from the failure modes of becoming subordinated to money and stuff like that. So yeah, these have always been life problems, and I don't pretend to have them solved, but I think we're in better shape today than we ever have been to try to figure these things out. There was something up here I saw that was a good question. Oh, Jim asks, is there going to be a MurphCon before I leave the UK? There's definitely going to be a thing in London. There's going to be some kind of big event in London because I have mad people in my DMs who are in London who want to hang out, and I do intend to hang out with those people somehow before I leave. So as I've kind of announced recently, I'm doing like a book tour, basically a DIY kind of like punk rock book tour for this book that I'm writing, How Academia Got Pwned. So I'm going to do a few like events for that in the UK before I leave. And at least one of them is probably going to be in London. So yeah, if you're at all in the UK or close enough to London that you want to come down to London, stay tuned for that. I'll definitely be having some kind of event in London. I don't know if I'm going to call it MurphCon. That would be pretty arrogant, I think. But yeah, we'll do some kind of meetup. I'll probably give some kind of talk, and there'll also be some kind of hangout. Let's see what else we got. Have I read Zizek's Strange Case of the Missing Lacanians? Nope, haven't. Sounds interesting, though. Bradshaw agrees with my rant on entrepreneurship. Cool. Yeah, Jean-Michael Loon says, I do think many intellectuals and revolutionaries in general are attached to items that currently are purchased via money, such as the dandy phenomena of the recent era. Yeah, I don't know exactly what you mean by dandy phenomena, but yeah, I agree. I think like people have this idea that you can be a radical intellectual and also have like some kind of guarantee of a respectable middle class income. You know, if you're lucky, maybe you can be blessed with that. But the idea that that's at all common or to be expected, that's a bullshit kind of product of like bourgeois academic ideas of the intellectual life. Made Fresh All Day says, hey, Justin, you're my favorite R programming tutorial maker on YouTube. Glad to catch a stream. Oh, thanks. Well, I haven't made that many R programming tutorials. I've only ever made a few. Although, for some reason, one of those videos is my most viewed YouTube video by far, actually. I guess just one of them just got picked up in the algorithm well, and something like 100,000 views or something like that. But I have been thinking actually about doing more data kind of instruction type stuff, like making more YouTube videos, more tutorial videos on YouTube. But also, I think I might at some point on my long list of projects, especially as I think about, finding ways to provide like real value, to speak to that question of finances that we discussed before. I think that I am going to put some more effort into developing my more kind of like data related, either like videos or books or some sort of, or courses, maybe some sort of instructional videos, because it's basically like the most materially valuable kind of skill that I have, and I have some resources and teaching materials on it. So yeah, I'll probably do more stuff like that. The only problem is that it's not exactly what I'm most interested in at the moment, so I'm not sure when exactly I'm going to get around to doing that. Oh, Made Fresh All Day was joking. Okay, sorry, I didn't get the joke. Yeah, I was gonna say I didn't think there would be many people in these live streams who also like have watched my R programming tutorials. All right, folks. Thank you very much, as always. All my patrons, huge thanks, as always. If there's any of you out there, if there are any of you out there who have been thinking about kind of becoming a member of my weird community and contributing financially, now would be a great time to do that. So reach out if you have any questions. There's some cool stuff that I give to people who support me financially on a monthly basis. So yeah, that's always most appreciated. But hey, also I want to reiterate, if you don't have money, it's all good. I try not to like pressure people to give me money. I try not to talk about it too much. And like I would say probably at least 90% of all the stuff I make is just totally free and online. So that's not going to change, I don't think. But yeah, if you do support what I'm doing and you like it, now would be an excellent time for you to kind of come out of the woodwork and throw me some cash, especially on a monthly basis, because then that helps me plan. Like basically, if I can get my Patreon and my other, for those of you who hate Patreon, it's also possible to become a monthly recurring contributor outside of Patreon. If you go to my website, The Other Life Now, there's also an alternative system for doing that. But basically, if I can get my kind of recurring monthly financial supporters to even like, it doesn't even have to be that much. Like if I could get it to be like even just twice what it is now, I would be able to make a really good case to my wife and to, my anyone who asks. I can make a really good case for doing everything I'm doing hardcore full-time in absolute independence without even necessarily having to get a job. So yeah, or maybe doing like a little bit of other paid work on the side. So that's kind of the goal. But yeah, we'll see. So, but also I'm very keen to like not, I don't want to pressure anyone. And I'm never going to like beg, like if there's not enough interest in what I'm doing out there in the world, to bring in enough money to make it possible for me to do this and only this full time. If that is the case, I will gladly accept that reality. It's just like I was saying before, like I don't consider myself entitled to make a complete living off of writing on the internet and speaking and teaching and doing these different things that I'm doing. So my only real interest at this point in time is to just figure out how much interest is there in the various things that I do. How much do people really value it? So that I can make some, reasonable calculations just about how to allocate my effort and things like that. So yeah, I do try to just remind people that if you do really like, what I do, it would be really good of you to come out of the woodwork and just throw a little bit of money each month, because it just helps me gauge, what people find valuable and what's really worth investing in terms of the work that I do on a daily basis. Because I have to decide kind of over the next week, over the next month, how much time and energy should I put into different possible tasks that I could be working on. So yeah, that's always appreciated. But at the end of the day, I'm just grateful that you're all here hanging out with me. As I said earlier in the stream tonight, the most important thing is, for an intellectual, the most important thing is just that there are people who understand what you're saying and who get where you're coming from and are just interested enough to listen and to read and to kind of follow you on your path to figuring out all the stuff it is you're trying to figure out and articulate. So ultimately, I'm just grateful that you're listening. I'm grateful that you're here. I'm grateful that there's always a few recurring friendly faces and names in the live stream and in my blog comments and stuff like that. So yeah, by the way, I just dropped a new installment in my How Academia Got Pwned series. I think I'm now at there's been 13 blog posts in this series. Each one is about 1,000 words or a little bit more on average, I think. And yeah, those blog posts are it's basically a kind of serialized book writing process that I'm doing. Obviously, at the end, it will require a lot of editing, but it's going to become a book. I'm basically trying to get out in one place my experience with academia, but also my experience with the internet and how that story kind of unfolded. Because I've kind of had, for the past several years, I've had one foot in academia and one foot in the internet. And so I've had a lot of interesting observations about, the current moment, I would say, of kind of contemporary intellectual politics, the politics of the intellectual life. And I think I'm uniquely well poised to kind of explain where I think the world is at right now in terms of the trade-offs involved. And let's just say it's not looking pretty for academia. I do think that essentially 2019 is kind of a point where we are crossing the Rubicon where it's just like, if you're an intelligent person, you're just not going to go into academia anymore. And you're going to dedicate yourself to doing serious full-time creative work on the internet. And I just don't think there's any getting around that at this point. I think for a few different interlocking reasons, the university is on a path of self-destruction that it literally could not, course correct if it wanted to or if it tried to. I think it's kind of structurally incapable of doing that. And but there are still a lot of people who have an investment in that system who have, a lot of motivation to represent the world in certain ways. And there are a lot of people who don't really think for themselves and who pay attention to those people. And so despite, my increasing confidence that it really is game over for academia, and I don't see any way in which that's averted. Despite my confidence in that being the case, I still think the next few years, perhaps even the next few decades, are going to still be extremely interesting and unpredictable, just because academia is not going to go gently into the night. It's going to be chaotic, and there's going to be a lot of misdirection and competing narratives, as you're seeing in many other domains also. So yeah, I think there's going to be, there already is an interesting war afoot in some sense. And I think it's just going to get more and more chaotic and more difficult. But that's why I'm so happy to be. That's why I'm happy to have officially kind of declared my allegiances. I'm glad that I don't have one foot in academia and one foot on the internet anymore. I'm glad that I took the plunge and decided to put both feet purely, on the internet, because the internet essentially means both of my feet are firmly planted on the ground where I am. I can say exactly what I want at any time, and I'm going to just try to interpret what's happening. I'm going to try to, analyze the data available to me, whether it be quantitative data or, the data of the world as I experience it. I'm going to try to basically integrate and synthesize that as correctly and honestly as I can. And I'm just going to basically write how things look. I'm going to speak how things look to me. And that's all I need to worry about doing. I'm done even thinking about like, oh, well, what way of putting my words is going to get me the most, book contracts, or what way of speaking is going to get me invited to this thing. Like all of those calculations are over for me now. And this is what I've wanted. This is what the internet means to me. This is what the true intellectual life means to me. All of that is over. And now I just have a few different platforms. I have my blog. I have writing books. I have this YouTube channel, and I can just simply ignore all of the other noise, and I can focus on trying to express what I see and relate what I feel and report on the data that I analyze in the most kind of specific and unconstrained radical honesty that I am capable of. So that's what I'm here doing. That's what I'm out here trying to do. And yeah, it's good to kind of go over that. So thank you all. I'm now 36 minutes over my self-allotted time limit. So I've been bad. In the future, I'm really going to try to keep my Thursday night solo sessions just one strong, clear, crisp hour from 9 p.m. UK to 10 p.m. UK. And I have violated that tonight, but I don't want to set a precedent with that. So thank you very much, everyone. If you want to get into the Discord server, all you got to do is shoot me a DM or email me. Also, I think I might go on tour. So this is the final thing. I'm about to hit the road since I'm a fugitive in the UK, basically. And since I'm writing a book and I'm, a lot of people are reading it, I might as well do a DIY book tour also. So if you want me to come to your town, let me know. I can't guarantee I'm going to be able to, but I might be able to. So right now, yes, I take Bitcoin, Deep Ryan. Thank you very much. If you go to my website, theotherlifenow.com/support, I think the page is, you can give me some money in Bitcoin and Ether or whatever. Martin Webb, what's up, man? Thank you for the kind words. I would love to come to Tokyo. I'm afraid that Tokyo, if I was going to go to Tokyo, I would need help with travel expenses. But yeah, if people have organizations that can pay for travel expenses, I'm totally willing to go almost anywhere. I would love to meet you all. And but even if you don't have money, even if you're just like a random individual, if you want to meet up or you want to have me at some event or whatever, even if it's just you and a few buddies, I can't guarantee I'm going to be able to do it, but hit me up. Let me know where you are, and it's good for me to just know who's out there and who would like me to come through. And who knows, maybe I'll be passing through, and maybe I can come by. I don't necessarily need money. This is a very DIY affair, so I can do whatever I want. So email me I wrote a blog post recently announcing that I'm going to try to do this like DIY book tour. So that has some information about where I might be, and it also has my email address on there. So you can email me or DM me on Twitter or whatever, or even I guess you could reply to this video if you wanted to. Yeah, let me know. I would love to do Brazil. Again, I wouldn't be able to afford to go to Brazil unless you had an organization that could pay for me to fly out there. But yeah, I'm totally open to it. Florida, I have some people in Gainesville. Shout out to my people in Gainesville. And my wife is from Florida, so I'm probably going to do a book talk in Gainesville sometime this year. So stay tuned for that. If you're in a different place in Florida, Mr. Dirt Son of Earth, then let me know. I might be able to do a different place also. Western New York, says Arsenius. I'm going to be in New York City, so there's that for sure. I have a couple people in New York City, so I'll keep you posted on that. But yeah, if you're somewhere else and you want me to come through, please let me know. I would love to hear it. So all right, everyone, that's all for now. Thank you very much. Very grateful. I wish you all the best, and I will see you sooner or later. We got John David Roden, a philosopher, is going to be coming on the show on April 1st. He studies kind of post-humanity stuff and kind of in accelerationist circles. And we got a few other people coming up too, but I don't want to get ahead of myself. I might do something in or near Texas. I think I have some invitations in the area. I got a few new ones today. I need to kind of check what's up. I need to make like a big list of the invitations that I have and see what I can reasonably do. But yeah, hit me up if you have a proposal. All right, everyone. Yes, I still have a Discord. If you want to get in the Discord, just shoot me a message on Twitter. All right, everyone. Thank you all. I'm sneaking out of here before I get another comment. Wish you all the best. Good night and good luck.